Welcome to episode 30 of the Thoughts with Lakshman podcast. My name is Lakshman Simple. I'm a junior in the Edgemont Junior Senior High School. I've been working with German for over a year and a half now. And yeah, let's get into it. So, this is the Thoughts with Lakshman podcast, actually, upload 2 series, the Learning German with Lakshman series and the Thoughts with Lakshman podcast. Um, in the beginning of the podcast, I focused on German culture and specific aspects of German society. Um, However, today we're going to be extending actually um, a series that we've been doing, and we're going to be extending a series on gender inequality. It's a very important anthropological topic, and I wanted to branch out the podcast into focusing more on important cultural issues. Um, so that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Um, And yeah, my podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. If you're interested, you can follow, subscribe, whatever you have to do. We're going to be uploading more content like this. But yeah, let's get into it. So, um, obviously, the last video, which I thought was pretty eye opening, we spoke about Latin America, gender inequality across Latin America, the wage gap that exists, the, some new programs that have recently made a lot of progress in the area, but there's still a lot more progress that needs to be made. Now we're going to be talking about North America, mainly the U.S. The U.S. is definitely far more advanced compared to the rest of the world in terms of gender equality. Still not perfect though, um, but we're going to be going into some stats. So, obviously gender pay gaps persist around the world, including the United States. According to public information collected by the International Trade Union Confederation, the global gender pay gap ranges from 3 to 51%, with an average of 17%. Equality in pay is approved in the U.S. since 1979, when women earned about 62% of what men earned. In 2010, American women on average earned 81% of what their men earned. But remember that this isn't just saying, oh, women are making 81% of what all men are making. That's not what that's saying. It's saying that for a woman who has the same qualifications and the same job as a man, that's what she's making 81% of what he's making. That's what that's saying. Um, Obviously, the Great Recession, um, 2007, 2010 really affected men and women differently. Men lost more jobs in women recession, but also experienced a faster recovery. 1 in 5 women were working part-time because they couldn't find work at the start of the recession. It became less, you know. But despite these developments, the overall unemployment rate for women was lower than men's actually, and they're also actually less likely to actually be among the long-term unemployed. So that's another positive thing. Um, Women are 50% more likely to work in the public sector. Women surpass men on education attainment among those employed, and 37% of women actually hold a bachelor's degree compared to 34% of men. But let's take a look and pay attention to where women are employed. So in 2010, there were approximately 65 million women in the labor force, and 53% of those women were concentrated in education, health services, trade, transportation, and utilities, and local government. Women were overrepresented in several industries and underrepresented in others. For example, in 2010, women represented 79% of the health and social services workforce and 68.6% of the education services workforce. However, women represented only 49.2% of the professional, um, scientific, and technical services sector and 9% of the construction sector. The Government Accountability Office, which is the GAO, They published a report that said that women constituted 60% of the low-wage workforce. Less educated women were more likely than less educated men to work part-time, and on average, 29% uh, of women and 15% of men actually worked part-time. Also, according to their report, single woman households actually had the lowest total annual income out of all the households, averaging about $27,000 a year in wages and salary earnings. 57% of that household income came from their personal, wages and salary earnings, and the other 12,000 actually came from other sources like government benefits and other household members' earnings. And that's like sometimes kids, that's sometimes, parents helping out. Without income from these sources, the low wage single mother households would be well below the poverty level. Women corporations too, in terms of women, in leadership positions, only 24% of CEOs in the U.S. are women, and they earn 75% as much as male CEOs. The Harvard Business School released a research report um, and found that companies with three or more women on the board of directors average 28 times more money in philanthropic donations, philanthropic donations than those with no women. Um, that's pretty interesting too. Obviously, companies with another stat, by the way, is companies with 25% or more women in leadership positions um, were able to, they actually were able to average 13 times more philanthropic donations than those with less women. So that's another positive thing, by the way. It's a very, very positive stat. Um, but again, the 2020 Global Gender Gap Report from the World Economic Forum ranks progress towards equality in 153 countries around the world. Funny enough, the U.S. is actually in 53rd in terms. That's actually very poor for the U.S. Mexico's 25th, Canada's 19th. Um, and some of the stats are from the Brookings Institute. It's pretty reliable, but in terms of Mexico, Mexico outperforms the U.S. in terms of one with their overall score. Um, the U.S. has more opportunity and educational attainment, but it underperforms in health and survival, and it underperforms with um, political empowerment, dramatically underperforms with political empowerment. Everything else, the U.S. is actually pretty strong in. Obviously, it's not equal. There's still work to be done, but political empowerment's the big weakness. Um, gender equality in the political domain is really calculated by the WEF using three indicators. The ratio of men to women in terms of years in executive office over the last 50 years. The current ratio of women to men in parliamentary positions and the current ratio of women to men in ministerial positions. All three North American nations score poorly, the first indicator. Neither Mexico nor the U.S. has actually had a female political leader. Canada was only led by a woman for 6 months in 1993 under April Campbell. In the United States, obviously, Hillary Clinton nearly won. It was the first year when voters even had the chance, though, to vote for a female presidential candidate. Um, and that's another thing that people don't realize, because political empowerment is actually a big, big area where the U.S. has actually been really behind, and you wouldn't think of it like that, but yeah, they've really been behind. Um, and that's really what's bringing down the U.S. to 53rd. They're actually really, really poor in terms of gender inequality in politics. Everything else, every other metric, the U.S. is doing well, especially in education, especially in health services. But with with political empowerment, they're not doing very well at all. And that's the thing. That's a problem that needs to be addressed. Uh, right, that has to be addressed because, and it will be addressed over time. There has been improvement. I mean, now we're going to have our first female vice president. Still, um, without a doubt, there is political equality, um, and that's an issue. Going further, um, parliamentary representation is actually equal in Mexico. And both Canada and the U.S. don't do nearly as well as Mexico in terms of parliamentary measure. With women accounting for just 25% of legislators. Canada excels in terms of ministerial representation, um, but still, scoring poorly in all three metrics, the U.S. falls in the bottom half of the global league table in terms of gender, equality in the political sphere, trailing behind, India, South Korea, the UAE, um, and if the U.S. hypothetically, so, and this was pretty interesting. I found from the study that if the U.S. matched Mexico's political empowerment score, it would go from 53rd to 6th in the rankings in terms for gender inequality. Um, so really, in the U.S., politics is the biggest challenge, but it's also the biggest opportunity for more equality. And especially, improving the representation of women in Congress is really imperative in doing this. And the last 3 decades have seen, rapid improvement on this front. I wish I could show you the graph, but it's truly exponential. Um, it skyrocketed starting in 1993. That's where the biggest jump, and then probably 1993 and 2017. Those are the biggest jumps. Um, but now, even now, there's still 3 men for every woman in U.S. Congress. It's also notable that the increase skewed heavily to one side of the aisle, but still, recently, however, um, um, the other side's doing better. But a step change in female representation is truly needed to get close to equality within any reasonable timeline. Um, and with Mexico's actually doing a good work because people don't really think of Mexico as being a forefront in terms of gender equality, and they're not. But with politics, they are. They are actually really ahead with politics. They're actually doing a good job in terms of making sure that there is a representation for both women and men. But still, the stats never lie. Again, the stats are never lie, and that the stats reveal that there is inequality, and the stats reveal that there is a severe lack of representation for women in Congress, um, and that's not good. There obviously work's being done now, but still, in terms of other areas, the U.S. is actually doing a decent job. Um, the U.S. is doing well, especially with education. The U.S. is actually near the top of the world in terms of educational equality. Um, Obviously, even in healthcare services too, the U.S. is doing very well. It's really just the political aspect of it. That's where they're struggling. Um, and But in terms of Mexico, for example, because it's also part of North America or Central America, but as we're counting for purposes of my series on gender equality, Mexico is going to be in the North America video. Um, but Mexico isn't as good in terms of educational opportunity. Um, and that's because there is less educational, generally speaking, across Mexico, there is less, educational opportunity. Um, And one of the problems with that is that oftentimes, for example,